So as I mentioned during the Time for All Ages a couple years ago, it was the beginning of my sabbatical, my husband and I went on a trip to Iceland to celebrate our 10th anniversary. And we knew that there would be volcanoes and waterfalls, but we were wholly unprepared for what it was actually like. First of all, the culture. We were flying over the ocean, and I said to my husband, there's like people there who speak their own language, right? We were prepared for the natural beauty, but I was like, I forgot that there was going to be a whole culture. And we try really hard usually when we travel to make sure we can say a few words in the native language so that we're not, and so we're like searching, like, how do you say please and thank you in Icelandic? And it turns out that these people are descended from the Vikings who settled the land about in the 800s. And by the 900s, the ancient chieftains there had formed what is now recognized as the earliest parliamentary government in the world. And they actually met near that fault line because the acoustics are so good that they could all hear each other. Isn't that cool? They spoke what is now known as Old Norse, the language of the early sagas of Odin and Thor and Loki. And then they were relatively isolated from trade and war and social evolutions. And today, the Icelandic language is closer to Old Norse than Norwegian. Icelanders can read the Old Norse sagas in their own language and understand it the way we can understand, say, Shakespeare. But people from Norway can't. That just is mind-blowing to me. Their history is fascinating. They are currently a multi-party parliamentary republic with a market economic system, strong social safety nets, universal health care. They have no military. They are considered a neutral nation. Their folklore and persistent beliefs in trolls and fairies and elves is understandable, given the landscape. We were in a normal suburban area, straight grid-shaped streets, and one of the streets went like this around a very large rock. And we were told that the local people told the construction workers, do not move that rock because there are elves there and they will get mad at you. And the construction workers like, okay, and they moved the rock, and there was a major construction accident. So they put the rock back to make the elves happy. And now the street goes around the rock. The energy of I'm not particularly attuned to energy like some people are, but you can feel it there. The energy is pretty palpable, which makes you understand why they would have so much, live mythology. Right as we were getting ready to visit there in 2023, there was a series of huge volcanic eruptions near Grindavik. There were large-scale evacuations of cities, including areas near the airport, which we were planning to fly into, and the Blue Lagoon hot springs that are very famous were closed because of these volcanic eruptions. We were a little worried about traveling there, and in fact, when we got there, our family members were constantly checking the news and texting us like every few hours. But you know who was not worried? The locals. They were like, yeah, this is what it means to live on an active volcanic island. They were just going about their normal business. As I mentioned earlier, it sits on that fault between the Eurasian and North American continental plains, and it was created by eruptions over millennia, and it is still being created, as I mentioned, with the island of Surtsey. It's like a beautiful version of what I think Mars probably looks like. Just like rocky and sparse. The natural native trees don't grow higher than about 3 feet. And they clear cut the island back, 800 years ago or whatever, and they really struggle to keep normal trees growing there because there's just so much wind. So it's really sparse, and then there's these like geysers just shooting up, and you're driving along in a bus and there's like steam coming out of the earth. It's pretty pretty wild. I remember saying to my husband, I don't think I've said wow this many times in the past several years as I have said it today. It's just like, wow, wow. But the thing that really struck me about this place, in addition to the incredible culture and the beauty, was the fact that they have an unending supply, or it's nearly unending supply, of geothermal heat. So that's what I mentioned with the kids a little while ago. They make this bread called lava bread. It's a rye bread that doesn't require really high heat to cook, but the traditional method is to put it in a Dutch pot, a cast iron pot, bury it in the ground near a hot spring, leave it overnight, and when you wake up, it's cooked. Because the ground is so hot that they can just do that. And there's this supply of boiling hot water just constantly flowing, spurting out of the ground, that they could capture it and use it to heat baths and spas and things like that. So as far back as hundreds of years ago, they were utilizing this heat. But in the 1900s, they started capturing it with pipes and converting the country to geothermal energy. So you can take the hottest, longest shower of your life in one of the coldest countries on earth, and it won't cost you any money, which is pretty amazing. But in the late 1900s, the 1990s, the engineers of this tiny nation decided to repave all the roads and highways in the whole country. So they started digging up the roads one by one, burying long pipes right underneath the road and running geothermally heated hot water right beneath the road to melt the snow and ice before it needed to be plowed or salted. This undertaking was massive. It was expensive and it was wild. But I love that they had the imagination to say, hey, we live in the Arctic Circle. It's really cold here. There's a ton of ice and snow. It makes driving cars dangerous. It takes a lot of resources to keep these roads clear constantly. But you know what else we have a lot of? Free hot water. And then they didn't just have the idea, right? Any of us could have an idea. They did it. They used it. They committed to making massive infrastructure changes to redirect that heat to work for them, to make their society safer, to make it less expensive in the long run, and use fewer resources. Which brings me to our theme this month, which is not incidentally how cool Iceland is, though it's very cool. This month, here at the Fellowship, we are forging freedom. We are learning from the earth teacher, the lava, the heat beneath the earth, which is a churning, roiling source of potential energy. And what we're forging here in our Sunday services and at our upcoming January 24th Rising Together Justice event is freedom. Through gaining the skills, tools, and spiritual resources to pursue abolition. I told Ava when we planned to talk about this, we were like going to go from solstice and Christmas and New Year to prison abolition. Ready, friends? Yeah. We're doing it. Okay. We're going to learn about our historic and current Unitarian Universalist efforts to imagine a society that is made safer and stronger and more resilient without policing and prisons as we know them today. When people talk about defunding the police or abolishing prisons, I know some of us, not all of us, but some of us might feel a little squirmy. But what we're exploring here is alternatives, restorative practices, using our resources and our funds to increase connection and community and safety rather than punishment that traps people in cycles of punishment over and over. We're talking about using our imaginations to envision a society where children of color don't have to learn about the risks of DWB or driving while black or brown. Or how they have to learn how to keep an officer calm so that they can come home safely. We're looking at the history and current state of our incarceration system in our country and how it is rooted in slave patrols, and how it makes for-profit corporations wealthy as long as more and more humans can be caged. Last summer, our Unitarian Universalist Association undertook a congregational study and action issue. The short for that is a CSAI, Congregational Study and Action Issue, that is geared toward exactly this. It's titled Abolition, Transformation, and Faith Formation. The introduction says, abolition is a holistic approach to systemic social change that includes, but is not limited to, the abolition of slavery, replacing systems and cultures of violence, coercion, and control with transformative justice and relational practices, and dismantling the prison industrial complex as we know it. It requires the transformation of our society and the replacement of theologies of retributive justice and violence. This study action issue calls on us, on our congregations, to learn and understand the root causes of crime, namely economic injustice, food and housing access, immigration justice, trauma, mental health care and addiction, and more. It calls on us to be in accountable relationships with incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people, to explore our theologies of inherent worthiness of every person and how that fits with our modern incarceration systems, and to learn from our histories of abolition movements and where they succeeded and where we still have work to do to abolish slavery in the present-day prison industrial complex. As Unitarian Universalists, this means that here at our fellowship and across the country, we are thinking about the ways that policing and incarceration has become our government's go-to tool for almost any problem. Mental health crisis, drug addiction epidemic, school truancy, seeking a better life in another country. When the only tool you have is a hammer, everything becomes a nail. When the only tool that our society has at its disposal to support communities is policing and incarceration, everything becomes a crime. We need more nuanced, creative, and varied approaches and tools available to support people in crisis, address addiction and trauma, help those who are unhoused or cannot afford basic necessities, and to keep our communities safe without perpetuating cycles of violence. This summer and fall, we saw the massive funding and growth of ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement in our country, and the ways that this government arm was weaponized against our own communities. Unmarked vans and masked men kidnapping people as they went to their car, stepped out of work, brought their kids to school, or attempted to go to their immigration court hearings. We heard from our minister emeritus, Reverend Roger Birchhausen, when he came to speak for our 70th anniversary about what it was like in Chicago and Oak Park, where he lives, where he and his neighbors have to blow a whistle that they wear around their neck if they see ICE agents abducting their neighbors so others can hide. Where he and other clergy have witnessed at the Broadview Detention Center, where undocumented immigrants and others, because who knows their status, because our government is not good at checking, are housed in inhumane conditions before they're being deported who knows where. The clergy have held vigils and attempted to cross barriers to provide spiritual care to those inside, only to be attacked by the police there who are guarding these unjust operations. The resources are immense. The funds, the money poured into these officers and their tactics, to the housing and deportation costs, not to mention the economic costs of the loss of swaths of our community, suddenly not at work. But the financial cost aside, the human toll is more pressing. The trauma, both direct and indirect, inflicted on immigrant communities, their families, friends, co-workers, and neighbors, school children, and faith communities is beyond measure. The fear that keeps these people from sending their children to school or going to work or to the doctor, or the anxiety that is preventing them from reporting real crimes to the authorities because of fear of retaliation. It's a staggering cost. But as we dig deep into what it means to put love at the center and live our Unitarian Universalist values out loud, we learn from Iceland, the land of both fire and ice, that we can be creative even when it feels impossible. We can use existing resources to keep our communities safe without demanding cycles of expense and harm. There is another way. There must be. This weekend, our United States government attacked the capital of Venezuela, the homeland of my grandfather and some of my aunts and cousins, the place where I first learned to speak Spanish, and where many of our Friday morning charla friends come from. Our government abducted the sitting president and first lady of that independent nation. Did Nicolas Maduro need to go? Yes, absolutely. He is a dictator and has destroyed his beautiful nation. But this unilateral decision on the part of our would-be dictator president is a terrifying turn of events, and one that our own Unitarian Universalist Association has issued a statement against. This is not diplomacy. This is ostensibly to prevent the flow of illegal narcotics and opioids, but who are we kidding? We know it's about oil and money. I'm pretty sure our president said that quiet part out loud. When the people of that nation have been fleeing for years and hiding here in a state of legal limbo for years, while ICE agents target anyone with darker skin and a Hispanic accent, this action of our country against Venezuela is especially horrendous. Now, I'm not, thank God, a politician. I'm not a political scientist or a legal scholar. I am not an economist or a military tactician. But just for a moment, I'm going to say politicians like to invoke thoughts and prayers, which is in fact my job. I'm going to swerve into their lane for a minute. And I will ask that whatever policies, laws, or procedures come next, we must center the humanity of those whose lives are most affected. We can argue the nuances of immigration law or budgets or strategies, but we cannot, as people of faith, abide a government that uses violence to gain power and power to gain money at the expense of human lives and human dignity. We cannot. We can learn from Iceland to go beyond what has always been the solution. We just plow and salt. To demand a creative possibility for safety. There must be another way. We can use the power of the Earth's deep fire to melt the ice. And we too can use what is deep within us and our communities to resist ice and all dehumanizing war, policing, and incarceration practices, even if it feels impossible. We are finding that roiling, bubbling, burning hot center of our humanity and saying human challenges are not inherently criminal. Human beings are not commodities to profit from. Worth and dignity is inherent in everyone, and we insist on treating every person as such. Imagination and possibility demand that we find another way to keep our communities safe and whole. And so join us the rest of this month as we forge freedom together. Amen. May it be so.